screening, and there was a person with a hijab there and everything, and still the person blew himself up by the church. So how do they justify their actions, attacking churches and things like that, or whoever's doing it with respect? And we have the covenants, and authentic teachings that don't attack places of worship and this and that. So I'm wondering if you would.
This is an important question and a very intelligent one. Why? In Sahih Bukhari and in other sources, we have a hadith that is actually drawn directly from this covenant that says that whoever oppresses a dhimmi or a muwahid, a person who has an ahad or a covenant, I will testify against him on the day of judgment, or in one variant, I will be his enemy on the day of judgment. Bukhari. There is another hadith in what are considered authentic Sunni sources that say, where the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, says, whoever hurts a dhimmi hurts me, and whoever hurts me angers Allah. And there is a very long list of traditions of the same nature. And so how do these people like ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra and other groups justify deliberately targeting the very people that the Prophet commanded us to protect? It's sahed, it's simple. We don't believe it. So, the sources are the sources, but the sources are subject to interpretation. And how convenient it is. Well, we don't accept that hadith. Yeah, but it's in Bukhari. But nonetheless, right? It's mawdu'i, right? It's da'if. So, that's what they do. They know it, but they deliberately violate it.
Dr.
The two quick questions. The documents that you showed in one of the slides, in the half a dozen or so of these letters, where are they preserved? Are they in some libraries and museums? And second part.
Okay, let me answer the first one, because by the time you ask me the second one, I will have forgotten the first one. All right, so the letters in question. Many of them, you see, I'm not very good with sound bites. I'm a professor. I was a university professor for 20 years, so I like to contextualize things. All right. Now, after the Prophet passed away, okay, there were certain documents that were transmitted through his family line, okay, through Ahl al-Bayt, his descendants, all right? Certain things were passed down the family. Documents, clothing, all kinds of things, swords, all right? Other things were passed down through other families of the companions, but most of the objects were passed down by the caliphs, okay? And so, Abu Bakr passed it on to Umar and to Uthman and to Ali, and then the Umayyads had all of these relics, these sacred relics. And so the Umayyads and the Abbasids and so on, all the way to the Ottomans. And the Ottomans, in their palace, had a room called the Chamber of Relics. All right? And it is now part of the Topkapi Museum in Turkey. And so most of these letters, if you would like to see them with your own eyes, you can see them. You will see the letters of the Prophet, with his seal, right, dictated by his scribes, quite often Ali and some of the other companions of the Prophet. You will see his clothing, you will see his rings, you will see his hair and his tooth, and all kinds of things. It's an entire museum full of relics and treasures that belong to the Prophet and his family. You have the swords of the companions. It's truly, when you have Orientalists who publish books claiming that there is no historical evidence that the Prophet ever existed, this is tangible proof that he existed. These letters, for example, have been studied. we can date things. They've taken part of the paper, the parchment, or the leather, and they've dated it. Okay? So they know how old it is. And it traces back to the 7th century. Okay? They've tested the ink. And the ink belongs to that period. It was a type of ink that was used at that time but wasn't used later. The interesting thing is a lot of these letters were only rediscovered in the 1800s and 1900s by Orientalists who were doing research in the Muslim world. And word for word, the content of those letters is identical to what was transmitted in our books of hadith and tafsir, and tarikh and sirah and so on, which, and a lot of people call that into question, the whole isnad thing, the whole ijaza thing, were things transmitted faithfully. Well, these letters, okay, right, they reappear 1400 years after the fact, and they're absolutely identical to what we have in our books. So this helps to strengthen people's faith. Yeah. So yes, so a lot of them in Topkapi. There's one in Oman. There's a letter of the Prophet in a mosque in Egypt. And there are other letters of the Prophet that are in private hands and private collections. Okay?
Professor Namuhak?
You had a second question. Yes, sorry.
Oh, good.
You quoted one non-Muslim source. Are there other non-Muslim sources?
Yes. If you look at early Christian sources, early Jewish sources, Samaritan sources, Zoroastrian sources, they tell us that they came out of the desert, with the sword in the hand, convert and die. They make the Sahaba sound like ISIS, okay? And they devastated and they destroyed the monastery. So this is the narrative in the literature from the Orientalists and everything. But if you go back and you read what those people said, the people who actually dealt with the early Muslims, the people who actually dealt with the Prophet, I gave you a few quotations. I could give you dozens and dozens more. But they confirm that actually there was a great deal of oppression in the Byzantine Empire. So they had adopted one form of Christianity and said that this is the official form of Christianity, and they persecuted all the other denominations. They said, you people are heterodox, or you people are heretical. So they were oppressed by the Byzantine Empire. The Jewish people during the time of the Prophet were forcibly converted to Christianity. And you had the Persian Empire, a great deal of oppression there towards the Christians. And so the Prophet did something incredibly wise. He reached out to these communities and he says, listen, you know me, because I've been a merchant all these years, and we've built up this relationship, and you know that I'm al-amin and everything, and the trustworthy. If you will become our allies, we will guarantee you freedom of religion. You'll be able to practice your faith freely, and we will protect your monasteries and your churches and everything. And so historians have always struggled. How is it possible that that Islam spread so quickly in such a short period of time? Boom, all of Arabia. Boom, all the way to the Maghreb. Boom, all through Spain and part of southern France. And on the other side, all the way to India, to the border of China. How was this possible? Well, because he had set things up that way. He had done the groundwork. There were already treaties and covenants in place with these communities. And this is confirmed by the historical sources as well, that the Muslims arrived, and of course, they had these, the cities in those days were walled. And if you would close the walls, it was pretty much impossible to get in. You'd have to lay siege and starve them out and so on. But the Muslims arrive, and then a Jewish person sneaks out and gives them the key. Says, come on, right? Free us from these people who are oppressors, right? They knew they were coming. They already had made alliances and treaties with them. So there was a great deal of Jewish support for the Muslims during the early days of Islam. A great deal of Christian support as well. And so all of these people who were persecuted and oppressed side with the Muslims whom they viewed as liberators.
You're right. By the time you get to the second question, you've probably forgotten. So thanks for waiting, and thanks for correcting me. Professor Namal Haq, and then we'll go to you.
Thank you
you very much. Of course, Prophet ﷺ is creating a religio-political community in Medina. And as a prophet of mercy, he is very careful and concerned about the right of minority, which can easily be suppressed to majority. And early Muslims did have a very high moral virtues in terms of how these things should be negotiated in the light of Quran. But if we come today in a modern secular context in which we are living, now the religious boundaries between one faith and another faith are still there and cannot be blurred. But we do believe in modern state, in one single citizenship. And in that citizenship, we really do not want to create hierarchies. And when we do, it's quite problematic. In my native Pakistan, when we recognize Christian, we also deprive them from certain positions. We say he can't be president, he can't be prime minister. So when we have a Christian who is actually very highly moral, like Justice Cornelius, or a Hindu like Justice Bhagwan Das, he cannot hold these positions, but Asif Zardari and Nawaz Sharif, who are thief to the code, they can hold these positions because they are Muslim. And you have created these hierarchies that Muslim is the best, most superior, then there are Ahl Kitab, and then there are other kuffar believers. So in modern political context, do you think that it's a relevant and good idea that in civic political sense, in religious sense, there will always be boundaries? Is it really a good idea, like Saudi Arabia, Iran, Pakistan, many countries, that we should create in civic political realm this kind of hierarchies? Is it good, and will it create a better state today, or we are talking only about historical experience?
No.
Good.
Next question.
Try to mix it up, you know, like a 10-minute answer or 1-second
Well,
answer.
multiple choice questions.
No, it's, it's about the Salihin, compete with each other in righteousness. It's not Muslim, Christian, Jew, Who's the most competent, qualified, pious, righteous, just person? And if you look through Islamic history, well, just take the case of Morocco to this day, they have very, very high-placed Jewish advisors, and you'd have the Sultan, and you had his Jewish advisors. So the Jewish community in Morocco played a very, very important role. The Nestorian Christians under the Abbasids were very, very enmeshed in ruling the Muslim world. They had very, very high positions of power. Most of the Ottoman sultans, most of their wives were Christian, and so, okay, maybe maybe the Christian wife wasn't the sultan, but she was still the wife, right? And so maybe he was the head, but she was the neck, right? And the neck can move the head in any direction it wants.
Yes, sir, in the back.
I'd like to know, the verse of the Quran that you showed almost at the beginning. It says that all those who believe in the Jews and the Christians and Sabi, those who do good deeds and so on, and they have nothing to fear and they will be rewarded. That's the basis that most people have made for pluralism. And there's another word, to my knowledge, which is very similar, except at the end, instead of Sabi, it probably says Zoroaster, something like that. The question is, does that limit to these who are named, or according to some minority opinion, this is giving the 1, 2, 3, and like that, anyone who fulfills these conditions, they may be not Jews or Christians or Sabi or Zoroastrians, but someone else who believes in one God and the hereafter and do good deeds. So that's the basic question. Can you comment on that?
So the Quran does indeed say that God sent a prophet and a messenger to every tribe and nation. And so in the Quran it mentions the religions that were present in the Middle East. It doesn't mention monotheistic leaders from China or Japan or some of the monotheistic leaders from indigenous America. Nonetheless, they did exist. And so if these people believed in one God and they were righteous, then yes, absolutely, there is salvation for people who believe in God and who are good.
We have had questions from only half the humanity and half of our ummah. So it was about time we had a question from the other half of the ummah, other half of the humanity. So no pressure, Hania, but you're next. You're representing half of them.
Was there in any way a change in his stance, in his reconciliatory attitude from the beginning over time towards the end? Because if I'm not mistaken, it's either a hadith or in the Quran that Jews and Christians will never be your friend. Don't get it wrong. Is that also true, and how do you reconcile the two things?
Okay. That's an Orientalist argument that's used quite often. Many Orientalists recognize that these covenants are genuine. However, they counter that they come from a period of time in which the Prophet was trying to attract people to support him. And this was kind of like honey. And when he didn't need them anymore, then he became more belligerent. In other words, they're saying he was a hypocrite and he just played them. Now, obviously, we cannot believe that. And that argument is not supported by the evidence, because we know that from day one, actually he was making these treaties when he was in Mecca. Even before he went to Medina, Christian delegations were visiting him in Mecca. And then he goes to Medina, Constitution of Medina. And then the second year of the Hijrah, he makes this covenant with the Christians from the monastery of St. Catherine's at Mount Sinai, and with the Armenian Christians from Jerusalem who came, and then so in the second year, and in the fourth year, and he made more during the year of delegations. And some people will say that, well, he killed the Jews. Well, that's subject to dispute. There are different interpretations. There are some people who question whether that really happens, and the context and so on. Nonetheless, we know that towards the end of his life, he made treaties with other Jewish communities. The Treaty of Maqna, okay? So in northwestern Arabia, it's kind of like it's in Jordan now, between Jordan and Egypt. Some people consider it part of the Sinai Peninsula. But the Jews of Maqna were given a treaty by the Prophet towards the end of his prophethood, and reiterating these same terms and conditions. So what's the gist? What's the lesson here? It has nothing to do with whether a person is a Jew or a Christian or a Zoroastrian, or even if they're polytheists, because he also made treaties with polytheists. It's whether you're our friend or our enemy. So this is not just a blanket thing, we love all Christians. We love all Christians who love us and who are our friends and who are our neighbors, and we will fight to protect them, and they will die to defend us. So there was a distinction between the people of the book who were the friends and allies of the Muslims, and those who were waging war against them. All right? So the Byzantine Empire, they weren't friends of the Muslims. The Prophet would reach out to people and say, listen, I invite you to Islam. And some people said, sounds like a good deal. All right, I'm in. Others said, I'm not too sure. And he'd say, well, let's make a treaty of friendship. How about that? Most of them said, I think that's a great idea. But some people, like Heraclius, for example, said, no, we're going to fight you people. Okay, well, if you want to be our enemies, then you're going to be our enemies. So there are Christians who are our friends, and there are Christians who are our enemies. And there's Jews who are our friends and Jews who are our enemies. Okay? So, right, there's a spectrum out there. Things aren't black and white.
We have barely 3 or 4 minutes. We need to break for